Hi, I'm Christopher John Farley, a senior editor at the Wall Street Journal. Today our guest at the WSJ Cafe is Natalie Portman. She's making her directorial debut with a new film, A Tale of Love and Darkness. Natalie, thanks for coming to the Wall Street Journal.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, this is your directorial debut, and I'm wondering, going into this film, is there anything you learned about directing that you didn't know before that was harder than you might have expected?
Yeah, there were a lot of things. I mean, you really have to keep your eye on so many different aspects, whereas when you're just acting, you're allowed a sort of tunnel vision. So the whole pre-production and post-production process, I really didn't know pre-production, all the preparations and the thousands of decisions you have to make that happen before you get to set. And then post-production, of course, the editing process, which is just infinite. I mean, you really could just do it forever, and it's hard to stop.
And how did you catch the directing bug? Was there a moment or something that happened that you thought, you know what, I think I want to get behind the camera too?
Well, when I read this book, I saw the film, and I think it really made me feel like, okay, I have a film in my head, thanks to, of course, this very inspiring writing, but I have it in my head. I need to make this, and that made me feel that I was ready. And of course, you know, having worked in film since I was 11, it's sort of a film school that I had in life, and gave me this sort of knowledge that is kind of in my bones, I hope. I mean, it feels like I was sort of understood what I was supposed to be doing.
And of course, the book is A Tale of Love and Darkness by Amos Oz. It's an international bestseller. What specifically about the book, other than being able to sort of picture it cinematically in your head, really spoke to you?
Well, it's a very moving story of a mother and a son, and the son sort of coming of age as a writer. And of course, it takes place at the birth of the state of Israel, which is a period of time that's figured a lot into my imagination because my grandparents were there at the time when it went from British Mandate of Palestine to Israel, and of course the war that followed. And it's just kind of a crazy time in history when all these refugees came, started their own country, of course, created this conflict that persists until today with people who were living there already. And it's a really fascinating moment in history that was interesting for me to explore.
Now, when you see this film, as people I'm sure will when it opens on August 19th, this movie you have takes place in the 40s.
Right.
Other than your grandparents having this emotional connection, what really created this emotional bond you seem to have with the goings-on at the birth, at the creation of Israel? I mean,
well, I think that just because I had heard so many stories about it growing up, that all of the emotions of that time are so interesting to me, you know, to imagine what it was like for my grandparents and all of their friends to have lost their entire families, to be completely orphaned and these refugees, and then come to a place and then try and create this sort of utopian community, saying we're going to be this socialist, you know, have these kibbutzes and create this like perfect society, and of course kind of oblivious to this larger issue that they were going to create, that you know, their grandchildren and great-grandchildren would still be dealing with, and it's really just emotionally fascinating too. This sort of that Oz writes about in the book, the sort of like dark fantasy of like being an orphan and the horror of that, but also the freedom of being, and you know, to have a whole country made up of orphans. It's pretty wild.
אם אתה צריך לבחור בין לשקר או להעליב, תבחר להיות נדיב.
And you were born in Jerusalem. How old were you when you left?
I left when I was 3 years old.
And do you have any memories of going back when you were younger? And how did those memories come into play when you went back to film this movie?
Yeah, I went back regularly because my paternal grandparents were there. My mom's American, so my dad's side of the family was there, and we would go back and visit regularly. And I think my memories, and also my imagination really colored it, because there is a Jerusalem that exists inside my head that does not exist in real life. You know, there's the expectation and the image that you have in your mind that isn't in reality, and that was a big thing for me too, because I think as an immigrant story, this movie and the book, of course, is very much about the expectations you have as an immigrant before you get to a place, and the disappointment with the reality of that place, and then of course idealizing the place you came from, and then that not being real either, that the place you came from isn't all you imagine it to be.
Now, Amos Oz's work is often almost entirely about families, but there's also this backstory going on here and about the creation of the state of Israel. And Oz himself has been very outspoken about bringing some resolution or more serious thought to the whole, to the resolution of conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. Does your film speak to that in any way?
A little bit. Oz has been an incredible, I mean, he's one of the great artists of our time, I think, as a writer. And he's kept his writing and his politics quite separate, but he's been very strong politically. He's one of the founders of the Peace Now movement, very strong proponent of a two-state solution, but has kept his sort of art and his politics separate. There is a passage in the book that I included in the movie that I was really moved by, because I hadn't heard this sort of assessment before, but how he talks about how the Jews and the Arabs are children of the same abusive father, which is Europe, and Europe completely persecuted the Jews, of course, and also persecuted the Arabs through colonialism. And rather than acknowledging that they're siblings of the same abusive father, they see the abusive father in the other. That the Jews see the Arabs as the new Nazis, and the Arabs see the Jews as the new colonialists. And it's absolutely true. It's the basis of the tragedy, is that they both suffered, and they both had a really awful experience, and now see the enemy in the other, as opposed to sort of finding new solutions forward. And he also talks about not being naive. No one's going to dance off into the sunset together, but there needs to be a solution, because it can't continue like this, of course.
Now, of course, A Tale of Love and Darkness, you wrote it, you directed it, and it's entirely in Hebrew. Tell me a bit about that choice, and did that make it difficult to get financing and get distribution for this film?
אמא, את בסדר?
בוא נמציח ציפור.
Well, I really wanted it to be in Hebrew because I think it's authentic to the place. I think it's kind of wild to make a movie that's set in a country and you don't speak the language of that country in the film. So it was really, and it's also a big part of the story. It's the birth of the language also, to have all these people coming from 100 different countries, speaking all these different languages, reviving a dead language. I mean, it was as if they would decide today that Latin would be spoken, and everyone in the world had to speak Latin.
Fine by me. It took 5 years of it. So
Yeah, you'd be ahead.
I'd be set up.
But of course, having to modernize that language that is used religiously primarily, suddenly having to figure out words for car and pencil and shirt that are not in the Bible, is really kind of an amazing moment in history also, that I don't think is paralleled anywhere in the world, where ancient language was revived and made a modern language. So it's really central to the story. And yes, it obviously makes the film more specific, and so less maybe commercially viable. But it's a small budget film. It's not aspiring to be the Avengers, obviously, and it's being marketed in that way and everything. So yeah, it was more challenging than if I made, a buddy cop movie in English. But you have to make what you're passionate about.
Well, speaking of the Avengers, of course, you're also in the Thor movies, and
Yes.
I'm wondering, I know you're not in Thor Ragnarok.
Yes.
Are you going to be part of the Marvel Universe going in the future, or are you done with Marvel?
As far as I know, I'm done. I mean, I don't know if maybe one day they'll ask for an Avengers 7 or whatever. I have no idea. But as far as I know, I'm done. But it was a great thing to be a part of.
And you're also working on some other projects, including playing Jackie Onassis in the movie Jackie.
Yes.
How is that going, and when are we going to see that?
It was a really incredible experience getting to play Jackie, and the film, which I'm really proud of, is going to premiere at the Venice Film Festival and then the Toronto Film Festival. So, yeah, I don't know when it's coming out yet in theaters, but that's when.
And how's your Ruth Bader Ginsburg project going?
I'm really excited about that. I'm a huge admirer of Ginsburg.
And you'll be playing her in this film.
Yes, and I am lucky enough to get to portray her, but it's in the near future.
It's in development still?
It's in development, and
okay, I'm just translating.
Hopefully, yes, my sign language of yes, sometime soon.
Okay, so A Tale of Love and Darkness opens August 19th. You wrote, directed it. Any more writing and directing projects for you in the future? You want to do this again?
I would love to. It was a really amazing experience and unique experience. But I'm in the early stages because it sort of feels like you need to get this one out into the world before really focusing on another.
Okay, Natalie Portman, the movie is A Tale of Love and Darkness. Thanks for coming to the Wall Street Journal.
Thank you so much for having me.